Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm Seth Monahan, Professor of Music Theory, and this is video 13 in my series on classical harmony and counterpoint. Today, we'll continue learning about small forms with a special interest in what I'm calling classical.
In a nutshell, this is a video.
Today we'll continue learning about small forms with a special interest in what I'm calling classical cadence games. In a nutshell, this video is about what happens when composers play with our expectations. Now, a bit of context. For modern listeners, one of the hardest things to grasp about the classical style is its unabashed reliance on predictability. Before Beethoven, at least, classical composers simply didn't put much of a premium on innovation for its own sake. Unlike artists today, they weren't usually out to shock or provoke or challenge their audiences. Their aim was to create music that was easily accessible and which honored what they thought of as the rules of good taste and propriety. This led to a heavy reliance on the conventional and thus on the predictable. And one of the most predictable aspects of this style is its use of cadences. Simply put, if you know the classical style, it's often possible to anticipate when a cadence is coming. And let's try this out. I'm going to play the opening of a Haydn piano trio, and I want you to ask yourself if you can hear or feel a cadence coming on. Here's my guess. If you watched video number 12 carefully, I bet that by the end of bar 4, you recognized that you were in the middle of a musical sentence. You heard a 2-bar idea presented in the tonic, and then the same thing presented over a change of harmony. And if you recognize this, I bet you sensed that in another 4 bars, we would get to the cadence that would bring the whole sentence to a close. In other words, knowing what you know about the style, hearing 2 plus 2 led you to expect plus 4 and a cadence that would wrap the whole thing up. Now, I'm not saying you know exactly what kind of cadence Haydn would use. He uses a PAC here. He could just as easily have used a half cadence. But the point is, you have a sense that the 8 bars would be coming to some kind of close. Now, if this wasn't your experience, I invite you to listen again with the score now, and to see if you can home in on that cadence before it happens. Let's try another one. This one was the last movement of Beethoven's Spring Sonata, and you probably noticed that it was another sentence, 2 plus 2 plus 4. And I bet there's a good chance that you saw the cadence in bar 8 coming from a mile away. But let's listen again, and this time I'm going to play you what Beethoven actually wrote, because it's not what I played you last time, and it's not what you see on the screen right now. Here's the actual score. And what I hope you noticed was that the cadence that we expected in bar 8 didn't actually happen. The dominant chord went to 6 rather than to 1, and the result is that the music just keeps chugging along for 2 more bars till it finally gets to a PAC. More specifically, what Beethoven does is actually rewind to music from before the cadence, as if to say, hold on, that wasn't right, let's try again. And he gets it right on the second try. So have another listen. So it turns out that expected cadences don't always materialize. In other words, composers can generate expectations that they then thwart by doing the unexpected. And there's often an expressive aspect to this. A thwarted expectation might have a comic element, maybe a tragic or a suspenseful one. And when a cadence vanishes before our ears, it usually generates tension by extending the cadential process forward in time and leaving us guessing what's to come. So our focus in this video is going to be on 2 reciprocal techniques that composers use to play games with our cadence expectations. The first is called cadence evasion. This is when an expected tonic triad is withheld or somehow undermined. We're anticipating a cadence, in other words, but it doesn't happen. And the second technique is called cadential extension. This is the music that follows the evaded cadence and resumes the push toward closure, almost always eventually finding a cadence. So let's go back to the Beethoven example we just heard so we can try these new terms out. The downbeat of bar 8, with its missing cadence, was the point of evasion. While the extra 2 bars, in the thing here that looks sort of like a band-aid, that was the extension that brought us to the PAC. In this video, I want to look at 4 different ways that cadences can be evaded. With the first 2, the expected cadential tonic, that's to say a root position tonic triad, never actually arrives. One of the most common ways to achieve this is to substitute some other chord for the tonic when the 5-7 resolves. This is often termed a deceptive resolution of 5-7, and composers often use 6, the submediant, to substitute for tonic. We hear this in the slow movement of Beethoven's 5th and final piano concerto. And as you listen, I want you to notice what happens at the first big forte push to the cadence in bars 9 and 10. Now, I hope that you were able to hear how the music could have, and almost seems like it wanted to, arrive on the tonic in the middle of that red box. But we get 6 instead. So Beethoven builds in a cadential extension to get us home. So I'm going to play it again starting from bar 9, and I want you to listen to how the extension seems to respond to and in some ways rectify that poignant move to 6 inside the red box. Another way to evade a cadence is to take the dominant not to 1, but to 1/6 instead. For this one, we'll stay with Beethoven and listen to a passage now from his late A major piano sonata, Opus 101. So on screen, we see a passage from the end of Beethoven's exposition with one small change. Here in the red box is the cadence that Beethoven could have written. So I'll play it for you this way first. And notice here, a few bars before the red box, there's very clear cadential rhetoric. There's a very strong 2 chord, moving to a 1/6/4 chord. In later videos, we'll learn that this is called the cadential 6/4 chord. It announces that the cadence is coming up. And in my version, the cadential 6/4 resolves directly to 5 and then to 1, just like it should. But here is what Beethoven does. Notice that while the 1/6/4 here still goes to 5, the bass voice slips downward so that the dominant is actually a 5/4/2 chord. And we know already that that's not a viable cadential 5. One of the reasons being that it's so strongly inclined to go to 1/6, as it does here. And of course, 1/6 is not a cadential chord either. It's the tonic, but it's not very stable. So without depriving us of the tonic chord per se, Beethoven has still evaded the cadence. And if we look at this passage in context, we'll see that he actually repeats the evasion, making us wait until the third go-around before finally bringing 5-7 firmly to a root position tonic. Let's listen to the whole passage now. Now let's look at a different type of evasion. In the next two scenarios, we find cadences evaded not because the root position tonic is missing, but because other factors prevent it from giving anything like a clear sense of closure. We might, for instance, have a rhythmically weak IAC instead of a strong PAC. We might touch on the tonic chord, but then immediately rewind to music we heard before the cadence, suggesting that we're not actually done with things. Or we might simply find the music refusing to relax or to give any effect of tension release, which is, of course, an important part of cadences. And we see all three of these in the finale of Mozart's Jupiter Symphony. Have a listen and see if you can hear the would-be cadence whose tonic is just too fleeting to really stick. Hopefully you noticed a period structure here. We start with an 8-bar antecedent, followed by an 11-bar consequent. Now, that consequent could have been 8 bars long, giving us a balanced 16-bar design. But Mozart blasts through his cadence so quickly that it just doesn't stick. I call this a run-on IAC. It looks like a cadence on the page, but we don't experience it as a cadence because the music just keeps charging forward through, in this case, a 3-bar cadential extension, and finally to a more conclusive PAC. Let's listen again. Another way to undermine a cadential tonic is to have one voice simply drop out at the moment of cadence. Mozart does this a lot in his piano music, as he does here in a C major section from his A minor sonata. Here is the moment I want you to listen for. Now notice that we get all the signs here. The build up to the 1-6-4, the so-called cadential 6-4 chord, and then the resolution to 5 with a big ornamental trill. But when Mozart gets to the tonic, the trilling voice just disappears. And those busybody 16th notes keep zipping along, suggesting we haven't really had anything like a cadence. And do you remember a few slides back when it took Beethoven 3 tries to get his cadence right? That's a standard trick, and Mozart uses it here too. Looking ahead, we see another dropout cadence 6 bars later. Here's our setup, and then there's our dropout. And in fact, it takes yet another 4 bars of manic 16th notes till we finally get to a proper PAC in C major, complete with victory fanfares and everything. So let's go back to the beginning and hear the whole thing through. Now, I want to point out one more cool thing. Notice that Mozart's cadential dominant is actually on the lowest G available on his keyboard. but it resolves to a C that's 2.5 octaves higher. And almost as if to compensate for this, Mozart's last bit of business is to send that bass line cascading down 2 octaves to land on the C that the bass should have probably resolved to in the first place. So in a sense, the closure that's proposed by the cadence in the second system is really only ratified when we finally get that low C at the end of the third system. Now I want to close by looking at a few longer, more elaborate cadential extensions. Now and then, composers use cadential extensions to give the impression that the music has somehow lost its way or gotten off track somehow, very often with harmony that's meant to strike us as meandering or disoriented. Here's the antecedent that opens Haydn's last piano trio. And here's a nicely balanced 4-bar consequent that uses 3 bars of Haydn's music and 1 bar of my own. Now, with this nicely balanced 8-bar layout in mind, listen to what Haydn actually does. Let's listen again, looking at Haydn's actual score. Here we see a wildly imbalanced asymmetrical period, a 4-bar antecedent followed by a 10-bar consequent. And I hope you could really feel that imbalance here. Here's the moment of evasion, followed by a truly bizarre 6-bar extension, and then finally the PAC in the dominant that we breezed right past 6 bars earlier. Our very last example might be even weirder than this. This is from the middle of the last movement of Mozart's A minor piano sonata. And again, we're in C major here, sort of. Have a listen and count the number of times Mozart flies past a cadence without it actually sticking. So what did we just hear? Mozart sets things into motion with hints of a 16-bar sentence. There's a 4-bar basic idea in C minor, followed by a repetition in C major. That's already extremely weird, using the parallel minor and major for a sentential presentation. Then there's an 8-bar continuation that leads to a run-on IAC, and then a rewind and redo. But this time, the cadential dominant leads to a wrong note tonic substitute twice, and then eventually a half cadence in E minor, a key that appears completely out of nowhere. So the net effect is one of basically total chaos. It's Mozart throwing his hat in the ring as if to prove that he can be just as witty and just as capricious as Haydn at his best. So let's end things with a quick review. You really need to remember 2 new concepts here. Cadence evasion, which is the moment that the cadential tonic doesn't arrive or doesn't stick. And the cadential extension, which is the passage that follows the evaded cadence and leads to the next cadence, or maybe the next evasion. And we saw evasions happening in basically 3 ways. We might find the tonic completely missing, as in a deceptive resolution of 5. We might find that tonic inverted, making it unsuitable for real closure. Or we might find the tonic is just weakened by other factors so that there's really no sense of rest or tension release, and thus no cadence. So that is classical cadence games in a nutshell. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.